In high-stakes environments, the assessment process usually defaults to a strict routine. Teachers identify errors, cross them out, write corrections in the margins, and assign a grade. The loop is closed. This process relies on a rigid hierarchy. The teacher operates as the sole authority of subject knowledge, evaluating performance and distributing advice, while the student is positioned as a passive recipient. The structure ensures efficiency, but it isolates the assessment from the student's perspective. It lacks dialogic feedback, the active, reciprocal exchange required to actually close learning gaps. When students receive a heavily corrected paper without participating in the process, the emotional and interactional context of their learning disappears. A teacher has no way of knowing if an error was caused by a lack of effort or deep anxiety over the material. To solve this specific assessment failure, researchers observed a team of secondary school educators in Singapore as they attempted a different approach. The researchers discovered that in high-stress classrooms, students do not naturally speak up about their struggles. Eliciting student voice requires specific structural engineering. This flowchart illustrates the architecture. The intervention begins before work is submitted, requiring learners to declare goals and perform a self-evaluation up front. This alters the teacher's role. Grading becomes a response to those initial reflections, rather than a broadcast. Productive feedback relies on a carefully engineered two-way exchange initiated by the student. To elicit that response, researchers introduced this feedback log template. The top section requires students to articulate an explicit task goal, establishing autonomy. Section 3 asks what went well and why, using emojis to capture emotions, creating a designated space for vulnerability. But an immediate cognitive hurdle arises. Students in passive learning environments often lack the vocabulary needed to accurately diagnose their own thinking. To solve this, teachers introduced a thinking wheel diagram. The inner circles provide baseline criteria for immediate self-correction. The outer rings provide the precise terminology for higher-order critical thinking, giving students the words to discuss reliability, utility, and context. Combined, the log and the wheel satisfy the requirements of the Lundy model for student participation. They provide the psychological space to express views safely and the cognitive voice to formulate them clearly. Front-loading this reflection shifts the function of the assessment document. It provides the teacher with a psychological map of the student's process, revealing exactly where to intervene. Self-determination theory requires autonomy, competence, and relatedness to engage learners. When Lavender's teacher addressed her anxiety and offered a reading strategy, fulfilling relatedness and competence, Lavender succeeded. Contrastingly, when Elizabeth's teacher ignored her need for competence by asking abstract questions, it triggered total A motivation. This understanding of student motivation clarifies a long-standing debate in formative assessment regarding numeric grades. A standard pedagogical axiom states that teachers should withhold numeric scores on practice tasks. The theory suggests that scores uniformly demotivate or distract students from qualitative comments. Yet students demanded their marks back, operating under identified regulation, where they personally value achieving a goal. For these learners, numeric grades act as essential telemetry, mapping the distance to their target, while qualitative comments provide the coordinates to cross that gap. But identifying the gap is only part of the process. The final section of the feedback log requires students to outline what they will do differently on the next assignment, a step known as feed forward. Despite the careful scaffolding, almost no students could successfully complete this final section. This failure reveals the massive challenge of FAR transfer. To write an improvement plan, a student must recognize the context of a new problem, recall previous feedback, and adapt those skills to a novel scenario. The cognitive load required for FAR transfer often exceeds what a solitary written artifact can facilitate. Written tools are effective for extracting reflections and diagnosing immediate errors, but they lack the dynamic flexibility required to execute complex cognitive transfer. We can now view this architecture through a synthesized understanding of psychology. Prior to submission, it acts as an engineered space to extract a student's baseline confidence and goals. After submission, teachers provide an audience for the student's voice and address those stated needs. To solve the transfer bottleneck discovered in the feed-forward phase, one final element is required. Closing the loop on complex skills requires stepping off the paper and engaging in dynamic, verbal reciprocal exchange. Live dialogue allows a teacher to instantly probe misunderstandings and guide the student's reasoning in real time. It is the only mechanism fast enough to advance learners' zone of proximal development. Effective feedback architecture is built on the deliberate orchestration of a student's psychological needs. When a learner feels heard, safe, and competent, they are psychologically primed to process and apply higher-order cognitive challenges.